Morning, everyone. I'm excited to welcome Dean Allison Vorderstrasse of the UMass Amherst College of Nursing. Dean Vorderstrasse, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you so much for the introduction. I just wanted to take a moment to welcome all of you on behalf of the College of Nursing to the second annual PhD Nursing Research Symposium. I want to send a special thanks to the planning committee and all of the students who have done such a fabulous job with the organization, planning, and implementation of this symposium, and to Dr. Walker for all her support in helping everybody get ready for today and in her leadership of the program. So I think today we celebrate the diversity of thought, ideas and research areas that all of you are embarking on during your PhD studies. And we're looking forward to seeing all the progress that you've made and sharing in discussion about your incredible ideas that you bring to nursing science and to research. So with that, I will turn it over, I believe, to Dr. Walker for the introduction of the day and more details about the symposium. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the morning.
Thank you so much, Dean Vorderstrasse, and good morning and welcome. And thank you for joining us for the second annual UMass Amherst PhD Nursing Research Symposium titled Collaborations That Innovate and Transform. My name is Dr. Rachel Walker. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a nurse inventor, associate professor, and director of the PhD program, which means I have the incredible pleasure of working with these amazing PhD students who are chiefly those responsible for today's event. Just a visual description of where I am. I'm seated in a wooden structure. I'm white. I have no makeup on. I have short brown hair, which is buzzed on the sides and falls slightly over one of my eyes, which are blue. And I'm wearing a burgundy outfit in honor of UMass, a jacket with a high-necked collar. I'm joining you today from the unceded lands of the Nipmuc Nation, who are still here. This is the second year we've done this. The first symposium was truly a labor of love, spearheaded by another one of our nursing PhD candidates, an emergency nurse, Ellen Smithline, who since that time has been featured nationally by Johnson & Johnson and others as one of the nurses, 10 nurses pioneering innovative solutions to the pandemic, and was recently nominated for the American Academy of Nursing's inaugural COVID-19 Courage Award. This year's symposium organizing committee, composed of faculty, some extremely dedicated staff, including members of the College of Nursing's Development Office, communication staff, and alumni relations, and led by an executive committee which includes PhD student co-chairs, Anne-Marie Morides, Janine Blake, Danielle Gould, and Emily Lugden. They are no less exceptional than the group that brought you last year's symposium. But before we launch in, I want to make you aware of a few housekeeping notes they've asked me to share. First of all, accessibility. We are honored to have 2 American Sign Language interpreters with us today, who you should see at least one of them pinned in the Zoom box on your screen just below the speaker at all times. Slides and materials for each speaker are linked from our program page if you would like to download them and for use with a screen reader. Attendees should see 2 features on the Zoom screen which allow for participation in today's event. One invites you to share questions that go specifically to the presenters and panelists, and the other is a general chat, which can be viewed by all other attendees. If you do not see these options on your screen, you may need to download an updated version of Zoom. Instructions for this were circulated over the weekend. Some of our community agreements today include that we will listen actively and respect difference, that we use I statements speaking to our own experiences and not for others, that we strive to keep it structural, addressing issues and ideas, not people's characters, that we do not make assumptions about identities, beliefs, values, or pronouns, that we recognize that almost anywhere people gather, and especially anytime we bring together faculty and students, there will be differences in power and privilege that inform the ways we relate to each other and in ways we are not equally aware of. We hope that those of us in this space who may occupy positionalities of greater power or privilege recognize this and decenter ourselves, making space for others and especially our students to have their voices heard. And we know many of our community are parents and caregivers or have bodies that need to rest periodically or move around. So we invite you to please take as many breaks as you need to. Most presentations are 15 minutes long. We have a number of other events throughout the day, including some e-posters and a panel discussion. And we'll provide specific instructions at the end of today around 11:30 for how to join our interactive breakout sessions. Today's theme is innovation. So I'd also like to note that 2020, as many of you may know, is the inaugural WHO designated International Year of the Nurse and Midwife, a year designated in part because it falls on the 200th anniversary of the birthday of nursing icon, the so-called Lady of the Lamp, Florence Nightingale. And while Florence and her efforts to innovate and transform today's theme, nursing and healthcare, continue to inspire, understandably, many around the globe, we also know that nursing as a profession neither began with Florence, nor does Florence define its future. Florence was a white, moneyed British woman from the upper class of Victorian England. Nursing education often relegates nursing's history to the realm of optional knowledge, rather than a subject deserving of critical interrogation, which is perhaps why we have quite a few mythologies that have also sprung up around the Lady of the Lamp, who was not a superhuman, but a human who was also deeply flawed, a product of her time, privilege she was born into, and power she did not earn. Recently, historian of nursing, Dr. Kylie Smith, wrote on Nursing Cleo, to focus only on Florence or to claim her as the most important nurse of all time hides the contribution of other types of nurses and nursing care, and reinforces the white Anglo-centric view of what it means to be a nurse. To be uncritical of her is to reify the colonizing and biopolitical hegemonies of white Western medicine. This is a history and a discourse that requires deconstruction. So critical history spaces like Nursing Cleo continue to complicate the narrative of nursing, adding new stories and names to those who've shaped nursing, to our vernacular. Many of them who were not white or straight or cisgender or non-disabled, who did not speak English as a first language, or who were not born into comfortable positions of power. Nurse and midwife leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs like Mary C. Cole, Marie Branch, Lillian Wald, Bessie Blunt Griffin, Sojourner Truth, Mabel Keaton Stoppers, Harriet Tubman, to name just a few. We hope as you take in today's presentations about collaborations across disciplines and areas of nursing practice that innovate and transform, you will also consider other forms of collaboration beyond just what we present today. Collaborations with historians and critical race theorists, philosophers and poets, artists and creatives, media makers, journalists, gender studies, government workers and policymakers, community organizers, abolitionists and activists, faith leaders, animal rescues, farmers, children, students, LPNs, CNAs, first responders, and any place knowledge, power, and resources that you have access to could help to fill a critical human or planetary need. For we are in a pandemic that appears on many fronts to be getting worse. We are staring down enormous challenges, from climate change to the continued deterioration of public health infrastructure and some institutions of democracy, to the centuries-old emergency that is settler colonialism and structural racism. We cannot afford to be divided, to work in our little silos we tend to get ourselves into. We need each other. We need radical solidarity, and we need collective action and collective moral imagination now as much as ever before. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being. With that, I would like to turn it back over to the organizing committee and our first guest presenter of the day, Dr. Tiffany Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walker. So to start off our speaker series, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Tiffany Kelly, who is the DeLuca Foundation Visiting Professor for Innovations and New Knowledge at the University of Connecticut School of Nursing, where she has developed the Healthcare Innovation Certificate Program. Dr. Kelly is a nursing innovator who has founded Nightingale Apps and iCare Nursing Solutions. Dr. Kelly, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Can everyone hear me okay? Well, what a delight to be here with you all today. The topic of my discussion this morning is on generating new knowledge in nursing and how it depends on us, including cross-disciplinary expertise to do so. I reflected on the title of your event today, Collaborations that Innovate and Transform. And as I thought about what to speak to you on specifically today, I thought about what that means. What does collaborations that innovate and transform mean? Well, what a timely topic as we continue to be challenged daily in all aspects of life. Yet from the challenges, we continue to adjust and adapt, sometimes out of necessity at the current moment. But in doing so requires an interdependency on others to do the same. I cannot think of a daily activity where I am not dependent upon someone or something, whether that activity is going to the grocery store, participating in a professional event like something like today, or attending to something regarding my own health for a visit. That's even changed. In every situation, we are collaborating in a new structural format through revised processes to meet the desired outcome of protecting the health of others during this pandemic. In my role as the DeLuca Foundation Visiting Professor for Innovation and New Knowledge at the University of Connecticut, I'm tasked with influencing and educating students across all degree programs on the value of innovating as bringing positive change to healthcare that addresses an unmet need for a population of interest or users. When you bring positive change forward or innovate, that transforms cultures, behaviors, and actions. However, one cannot do this without collaborating with others. And as I prepared to speak with you all today, my mind ran through the many pivotal people who have influenced my life for the better, and more specifically in the context of my career development in nursing and healthcare. As you can imagine, many of those individuals have been nurses, but many of them are not nurses, and they don't often get the spotlight in the way in which I think they deserve as I reflect on certain elements of how we need to collaborate in advancing nursing science. So the title of my talk this morning is about generating new knowledge and depending upon us as nurses to include cross-disciplinary expertise. As nurses, we are the largest group of healthcare professionals within the industry at approximately 4 million individuals. Despite our volume of numbers and being the largest healthcare professional group, we need the knowledge, skills, and abilities of our colleagues to ensure that the people in which we serve receive the best possible outcomes. I have learned firsthand over the last 17 years as I have navigated through my nursing professional development and began to see where my nursing knowledge could take me in my career after I left bedside nursing 3.5 short years into my career. Thus, I've been a nurse for 20 years now. And the value of collaboration and exactly how to do it only became apparent to me when I ventured out of direct nursing care and took on new adventures in the field that helped me push the boundaries for where nursing knowledge can and should be found in healthcare. With that,
I'd like to reflect on 4 personal examples to bring to life what I mean by collaboration, and more importantly, the impact it has had on the work I've done as a nurse. 17 years ago, I was hired for a role as a clinical analyst at Boston Children's Hospital to work on their electronic health record project. I thought, how hard could this be? We're going to take paper-based records and make them digital. How naive of me to think so. The last 17 years of my career have been focused on that. At that time, I had no technical knowledge or expertise. My clinical expertise was what led to my hire to understanding nursing workflow. I worked in the IT department during those 3.5 years. This was before nursing informatics had its own department the way it does in many organizations today. And immediately I was introduced to the expertise of IT professionals. They taught me how electronic health records, which are commonly referred to as EHRs, are configured, what was possible and what was not possible. We needed to work together in order to design the system for the hospital. My manager was a physician with extensive coding expertise. However, beyond the day-to-day team that I worked on, we had dozens of meetings to go through the system design lifecycle with the key stakeholders. This is where I really came to understand healthcare processes and the value of each specialty area. I knew that the other disciplines were important when I was at the bedside. However, I did not know the scope, nor did I really know them as individuals. Thus, this experience introduced me to the complexities of pharmacy, the uniqueness of the emergency department and behavioral health services. I had the opportunity to work with the cardiology team and learn about their own specific needs. We had meetings with senior leaders across all departments on a weekly basis. In no other nursing role would I have had such exposure and an introduction to the complexity of what is healthcare delivery. So often I believe that we consider electronic health records and other technologies to be simply that, the tech that we have to learn or was forced upon us. However, for me, from that experience, I believe the success of any new innovation, whether a technology, a new product, a new service, process, is truly dependent upon the relationships you build to help understand the user's needs, their concerns, their worries, and then work to build that trust and knowledge to create the solution that will allow for a new product, process, or service that solves the need at hand. I learned from everyone that I worked with on that project. There were dozens I interacted with on a daily basis. Many were nurses, but many were not. So my takeaway from that example that has influenced me and how I approach bringing change to healthcare is if you do not have these collaborative relationships, the technology or the innovation does not matter. The thing is not more important than the relationship. The second example I'd like to share with you includes an element of serendipity, and I'm not sure how many of you have had this experience in your career so far, but these tend to be some of the most memorable for me and most impactful. I went on to pursue a PhD at Duke University in the School of Nursing to better understand the idea that electronic health records were driving higher quality care. From my experience in watching nurses and other healthcare professionals transition to an electronic health record, I really wasn't convinced that we were truly making safer, higher quality care environments, especially when I would hear nurses say, I feel like I don't know my patients anymore. And that happened often. It happened often, off the cuff, and it never made it to an agenda item in a meeting. But I never forgot it. So I went off to pursue my PhD with a concentration in nursing informatics. And I will be honest again, at the time, I did not really even know what nursing informatics meant. I thought it was about clinical applications, but in reality, informatics is about using data and information to generate new knowledge and wisdom for nurses and healthcare professionals. The technology becomes the delivery tool to do so. During my PhD, one of my expectations was to be a teaching assistant, which many of you may have that experience as well, for an introduction to informatics as a master's course. This was over a summer, I think between my second and third year. I was invited to a dinner with the class and I arrived a little bit late. When I arrived, there were 2 seats left at the table. One was close to the professor, the only person that I knew, and the other was at the other end of the table. I took the seat closest to the professor, and next to me on my left, there was a gentleman who was a bit older than me. He started to ask me questions about my interests, and I got to talking about my dissertation focus and knowing the patient. He became interested and offered to work with me on an independent study. I learned his name was Ed Hammond. Ed Hammond is one of the first inventors of the electronic health record back in the late 1960s. And I went back to my advisor the next day and shared this with her. She was eating her lunch at the time. I'll never forget this. And her jaw dropped in shock when I told her he was willing to work with me. I had no knowledge of what an expert he was or how profound his work had been. But that element of serendipity introduced me to him. And he is an engineer by education and training. I worked with him on an independent study. He challenged me to think differently and challenge the status quo of what we have in front of us today and what could be tomorrow. Many times we did not agree. Many times we looked at things in a different way from one another, but we reflected on that experience and were able to find new ways of looking at these problems. He intimidated me weekly, but I also looked forward to my time with him. For me, it was a true gift. I would not be where I am today had I not had the opportunity to work with him. He offered me a new way of thinking about healthcare problems that I hadn't yet learned in my nursing education. We stay in touch. He wrote the foreword to my book on electronic health records and occasionally participates in guest lectures when I invite him to do so. One thing he told me that I'll share with you when I was in his office one day was that he knows he can't know everything. However, as long as he knows where to go to find what he needs, he will be okay. And I think that that's important for each of you to remember as well. He was referring to finding collaborators in other disciplines and or self-teaching through books and courses. And when it comes to solving problems, I find many nurses will reflect and say, well, I'm not this or I'm not that. And what I don't want you to do is focus on what you don't know. What I do want you to focus on is what you do know. Focus on your strengths and find those who will fill the gaps. From there, at a certain point in my PhD dissertation research, I became acutely aware that there were big problems nurses were facing with the electronic health record as the new recording device for managing information, partnering with the workstations on wheels, one of my least favorite items. The paper-based report sheets that live in nurses' pockets were becoming increasingly more valuable and beginning to serve as temporary charting tools until the nurse had a few minutes to document. At one point, I saw the phones coming out of nurses' pockets. These did not exist when I was a new nurse. I thought, this is working. This isn't something that is just one more thing that gets added. Now, these weren't hospital procured devices. These were workarounds in many ways. But through a series of events and being in an environment that challenged me to think, which is what each of you are doing as PhD students, being challenged to think about how to solve these complex problems affecting human health, I at one point had an aha moment and thought, I could do this. I could solve this problem. At that point is when I knew I was going to make the app to solve this problem to my patient. Even though this was not related to my dissertation grant or aims, I had found my next step. And fast forwarding a bit, I opted to become an entrepreneur post-PhD and work to commercialize Know My Patient through Nightingale Apps. This, I learned quickly, was not the traditional next step after earning your PhD. Even though I had a business degree, I needed some help in getting the business started. I moved back to Boston and saw an opportunity for a startup boot camp through Northeastern University, where I earned my master's in nursing administration and MBA. The event was 6 weeks on Wednesday nights for 2 hours and at a nominal cost. I signed up immediately, and that is where I met Bob Lentz, which is Northeastern's entrepreneur in residence. Bob became a mentor to me. Bob's not a nurse. He worked in venture capital for years. He introduced me to the idea ecosystem to help build out my business plan and eventually pitch for a $10,000 non-dilutive grant, which I was awarded. From this, I learned there'll be times when you are going to need additional expertise. You'll feel it. You'll know. You'll feel like you can't move forward until you find the answer to something that you haven't been able to find yet. Seek it out And the opportunities you find may lead to even more opportunities you wouldn't have otherwise had. Now, the last example I'll share with you today is in relation to the current role I have at UConn in the School of Nursing. As my responsibility is to foster innovative thinking and activities to our students across all degree programs, I knew going into the role that I couldn't do it alone. I knew I was going to need an environment and an ecosystem and infrastructure to be able to support to do this. And the responsibility involves developing a culture as well as an infrastructure to do so. I've been fortunate that the leadership within our School of Nursing, from our dean, associate deans, and even my peer faculty, have been willing and able and encouraging to do so. Beyond the School of Nursing, however, I've also been able to connect with other individuals within the Worth Institute and our venture development arm to help me advance our students and faculty that want to advance their ideas and innovations. So the lesson learned from this is you cannot succeed in advancing nursing science alone. You need leadership and peer buy-in within nursing and beyond. And if in an academic environment that also includes the university infrastructure, make an effort to develop those relationships with leaders outside of your individual school. Now, I've shared 4 personal examples with you on how essential collaboration is to developing your new knowledge in nursing. In order to benefit the mission of impacting human health, I've not mentioned any nursing mentors today, but for the purposes of this conversation, I wanted to highlight how valuable our colleagues in other disciplines can be in helping us advance nursing science. The other thread I would like to just point out that's amongst all of these examples is how each one of these examples built upon one another. So as you grow in your development as a nurse leader, a nurse scientist, nurse innovator, nurse inventor, your knowledge, experiences, skills, and abilities will continue to develop in ways that will require the step that you just completed. Thus, I challenge each of you to look at your area of nursing science and continue to consider engaging in conversations with others. Even if you don't know where they can go, even if it seems like those disciplines are far from where you are today, you never know when that relationship can help you take your work to the next step. And when you do this, you begin to change your perspective and become a nurse with more perspective to share. But the other thing that happens with this is you begin to influence others about the power and value about what being a nurse means and what knowledge nurses can generate to benefit the health of our population. And with that, thank you very much for having me today, and I look forward to the panel discussion later this morning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. We're going to take a moment to allow our ASL interpreters to switch. And I would like to invite you all to take this time to submit any questions you might have using the Q&A button at the bottom of your window. And these questions will be built into our question and answer panel discussion later this morning. Excellent. So I am happy to introduce Dr. Gabrielle Abelard, who is an advanced practice nurse with over 22 years of experience in mental health nursing and academia. Dr. Abelard is a clinical assistant professor at UMass Amherst and the president of Abelard Psychotherapy. Her research focuses on the use of telebehavioral health to teach psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner students. Dr. Abelard, thank you so much for joining us.
Great, and good morning. I am wondering if I can just put my slide up. So may I share my screen if that's okay?
So I think, is this your presentation that is shared right now?
Yeah, so is this live from my link? And if it is, then great.
Yes, so you should have control over it so that you can switch the slides yourself.
Great. So good morning, everyone. I am so delighted to be here. Thank you, Dr. Kelly, for that wonderful presentation. And as discussed, I have the pleasure of wearing 2 hats, one as the coordinator of the Psychiatric Mental Health DNP program, and also as the director and owner of Abelard Psychotherapy and a patient clinic in Stoughton and Dedham, Mass. So I have the pleasure today of talking to you about keeping self in healthcare. And so I'd like to ask everyone, how are you feeling today? And should I ask someone to move my slide? Because I see that I'm not able to do that.
I think we will get that sorted in just a moment.
So as our organizer is doing that, you know, the point of reflection is really around how are you taking good care of yourself, especially today with so many messages in our universe happening. And I did just go ahead and share my screen to see if that makes things a little bit easier. And then I'll go ahead and start my presentation. So let's see if that works. Wonderful. So how are you doing today? As we know, in terms of COVID-19 deaths, over 200,000 deaths have been lost US-wide. In Massachusetts, over 8,000. It's certainly impacted our economy, our healthcare system, and healthcare workers across the country. What I hear in my clinical practice is a great deal of fear, uncertainty, isolation, loss, and ambivalence. And so how are you feeling today? Just this morning, I opened my phone and looked at some news articles, and this was just all in one day, reading about upcoming elections, the flu season, more job losses, vacancies across the US in terms of homes and apartments, the wildfires in Southern California, protests happening regarding the recent loss of a Black male and many other males in the past, and beloved leaders in our country who've also passed. So many, many images. And this is during a time when we are socially distancing and we wear masks. And so this slide is purposely placed in the sense of, do you know what this nurse here is feeling or experiencing? Is she smiling? Is she sad? Is she happy? And the answer is with the mask, it has made it more difficult for us to be colleagues and to respond to some of the needs, although we are protecting one another in terms of preventing, helping to decrease the risk for infection. What we're not seeing is our affective emotions. So I hope today, by the end of my talk, I can have each and every one of you think about intentionally, how can you keep yourself in healthcare? And so the ANA published the results of a study where they looked at 32,000 nurses. And what they found was that 87% feared going to work. 36% had cared for an infectious patient without adequate PPE. 11% preparation to care for patients with COVID-19, and over 1,700 healthcare worker deaths so far in the United States. And so what are we seeing? What is happening? And certainly as we think about this, what are we doing ourselves when it comes to our self-care? So what we've seen is that more sleep has happened during the pandemic, but with those with pre-existing sleep issues, they have been at risk, higher risk for exacerbations and mental health issues. We've also noted that there's been an increase in emotional eating, a 38% increase in meals. We've also noted an increase in sedentary behavior during lockdown and or social distancing, and a dramatic change and decrease in physical activity. Most concerning, and what I've seen across the boards, especially in clinical practice, is an increase in substance use, most specifically wine. I've had clients have wine parties to celebrate an event, wine parties for books. Wine has increased dramatically. And other substances like caffeine and marijuana. And so how are you doing when it comes to how you're coping? Are you utilizing any substances yourself to get through day to day? Alcohol use, we have also found, have increased the risk of domestic violence. At the time of assault, it's estimated that 25 to 15% had been drinking some form of alcohol. And it's set up to that this could be up to 70%. One of the areas that I have been most concerned about is with many offices not working at full capacity. In my outpatient practice, we've seen a decrease in referrals from DCF and or from other agencies who often are the reporters of such instances. And we especially saw this during the school year when a lot of children and adolescents were at home instead of at school, where we have traditionally have seen increase in referrals during peak times during the school year from school professionals who are concerned about anxiety and or depression, with many of our students going in the home and many of our parents doing or assisting with some form of education at home. That anxiety and depression, we've seen increases there as well because of that. And so what are the effects on quarantining on our mental health? And so we knew even before COVID-19, a stigma did in fact exist. We knew that the average 1 in 5 persons with a mental health disorder did not seek services because of the stigma of receiving mental health services. So what are we seeing now? We're seeing more deprivation of usual practices, an increase of psychological distress, stress, anxiety, and depression. We've also seen an increase in psychosomatic symptoms. I spoke earlier on another slide about insomnia. It's been amazing because it's gone either way. Even when I speak with some colleagues around how they're managing their sleep and how they're doing with virtual learning, what we find is that a lot of us are working a lot more. And a lot of us are working in spaces that often in the past we would not work. So for instance, on our beds or in our bedrooms or on couches or chases. And so with that said, in terms of our own body proxemics, what we're seeing is an increase in injuries in terms of neck strain and wrist strain and shoulder strain. And so I ask you to think and reflect upon, where are you doing your daily work for those of you who are working virtually from home. And in terms of reported responses, and this was from a June study that looked at young adults, and they surveyed approximately over 5,000 participants. And what they found is that 40 to 9% of US adults reported at least one adverse mental and or behavioral health condition. And approximately 13% of those individuals had started or increased substance use to cope with COVID-19. And of note is that there's a disproportionate amount of higher rates of suicidal thinking, especially in ethnic minorities, ages 18, and those ages 18 to 24, and also within healthcare workers as well. And when we look back and compare that to a similar study in 2019, we found that symptoms of anxiety disorder is roughly 3 times higher now. Depressive disorder is roughly 4 times higher today. And suicide reported as a serious consideration in the last 30 days is roughly 2 times higher with the advent of COVID-19. So access to mental health services. And we can see even worldwide, this has been a huge concern, a survey looking at over 130 countries, that over 60% reported disruptions in services in vulnerable groups. 72% in children and adolescents, and 70% in older adults. We also know that 78% reported disruption in school mental health services, as I alluded to earlier, and 80% of high-income countries who are now using telemedicine versus 50% of low-income countries. Of note here in Massachusetts, owning a private practice myself, I've seen our call increase almost double in terms of consumers calling looking for mental health services. And honestly, we have not been able to respond to the cause because there's so much need currently. As the coordinator of our psych mental health program, as I interview students into our program, what I'm hearing is many of our family nurse practitioners, our acute care nurses are coming to UMass to our program because what they're finding is when they refer their patients for psychiatric mental health services that the waits are long. One student I interviewed shared that it was going to be an 8-month waiting list. Another shared it was a 12-month waiting list. Currently in my practice, we have a 3-month waiting list to get a new patient in, and we're actively recruiting to respond to the need. And so I say to any of you who are thinking of psychiatric mental health in terms of a career, the time is now if you're thinking about it. In terms of crisis line in Massachusetts, calls to Samaritans in Boston, there was an 84.1 increase in text messages to the crisis lines between March 12th and June 30th. So the phone calls were up by 23.5%. And most of the consumers who are calling in are reporting a feeling of loss and a feeling of the unknown. I often hear from my clients, they say, Dr. Abelard, I just don't know what to expect. I don't know if my company is going to survive this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay my bills next month. I'm very concerned of what's going to happen. In terms of new callers, in May, the Samaritans of Fall River and New Bedford saw that they had an increase of calls reporting feeling of suicidal ideation by 16%, which was up from 7.9% in 2019. So thank goodness for telemedicine. So my research history is that my dissertation was focused on looking at the experience of advanced practice nurses who are conducting telemental health. And this was back in 2014. And so fast forward to today with the pandemic, we know that many practices are now utilizing telemedicine, and that is because of the pandemic and needing to do that. In my private practice, over 95% of our services, and we offer services both on an outpatient level and also through in-home therapy services, are now conducted via telehealth. We know that that has also assisted the retention and has improved it by 35%. We have a lower no-show rate, a lower cancel rate, because we're able to meet our clients where they're at in their homes, or some of them in their cars if they don't have a private space to meet. But what we also need to see is that the issues that may occur when the federal rules on telehealth reimbursement waivers expire. For instance, currently over 80% of my clients' copays have been waived because a lot of the insurance companies have made that stance to waive copays during COVID-19. But what happens after those federal restrictions are waived in terms of being able to support our communities and our consumers and patients who have not been able to retain their jobs after the pandemic? So effects of increased screen time, and we see this. So we know that there's Zoom fatigue. Over 300 million daily participants of Zoom, okay? What we know is that when we're participating in Zoom, there's a low reward, but there's a high cost in terms of effort, excuse me. And so what we encourage is that trying to look at other people, but also act as if you're looking at them in the eyes is what our goal is during Zoom. But doing this does take strain. You know, we are compensating with more cognitive and emotional effort because there's a lack of nonverbal cues, i.e. our body language. We also know that physical activity can reduce the risk of fatigue by 40%. So this is where I encourage all of us Zoom users is to take breaks, stand up during Zoom use, walk away, do some stretches to our neck, our shoulder, our backs, so that we can limit the number of injuries. In terms of eye strain, we know that we're spending 3 to 4 times the amount of screen time on platforms like Zoom, on our phones, on social media, etc. More patients are reporting the eye strain complaints, and the symptoms include dry eyes, sensitivity to light and glare, and even blurry and fluctuating vision. So some tips include look away from the screen for at least an hour. Tinted glasses, my glasses that I'm wearing today, I have a tint that helps with those blue lights that are emitted from phones. And so if you are struggling with eye tension or even tension headaches from being in front of Zoom, you can actually purchase some tinted glasses if you need readers at a relatively low cost. Apologize. And then of course, decrease the brightness on your screen. And then if you can, swap digital activities for audio ones when possible, i.e. podcasts instead of an ebook. And so combating isolation, one important strategy is the use of physical distance instead of calling it social distance. People are increasingly scared of each other because of this notion, but if we can think of it of having physical distance instead of social distancing, that may help. Simple actions of even waving and or saying hello when we have our mask can make a difference as well when it comes to social engagement. And it actually sends a signal to our body to stand down, and then reach out to people each day. And so these are a few areas that we can do in terms of coping with COVID-19. And so in terms of avoiding stressful situations, not watching too much TV or the news, I shared that earlier slide of just what I saw when I opened my computer this morning. Connecting with others, sharing fears that you may have. I read one article that encouraged even taking a shower in the middle of the day. And the shower is a place where you can't bring your social media and or your phone, and a place where you can be one with yourself. A picture of some stretching on the left. Some music can also be helpful. Practicing relaxation techniques and taking breaks. And then finally, in terms of self-care and being focused on the inner nurse, I have a slide to the right here. It's fine, I'll do everything, it's fine. And actually, it's really not fine. We all need to call out our boundaries. And APNA, the American Psychiatric Nurses Association, at the conference in 2019, used the mantra of eat, breathe, and sleep. Maya Angelou shared that as soon as healing takes place, go out and heal somebody else once your own personal healing has been done. And finally, please keep self and healthcare being intentional. Continue to innovate your own self-care practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abelard. Excellent. So we now have some time built in for a PhD student poster session that some of the PhD students across the UMass campuses have submitted. We have this scheduled until 9:55. So if anybody wants to take a stretch break and watch the posters, come back in about 5 minutes. We might run a couple minutes over so that we can get everybody, all the posters through, but be ready to begin again at 9:55. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, we're just about ready to come back for our second round of speakers. I'm going to give Emily and our interpreters a chance to get set. And Dr. Zuckerman, if Emily has your slides, she will share her control of her screen so you can click to change them.
Sure, that's fine. Or you can let me share my screen and I'll put them up. It's whatever you'd like.
Okay. There we go. There we go. All right. So it looks like we're set. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Ethan Zuckerman. He's an associate professor of public policy, communication, and information at UMass Amherst. He has an interdisciplinary position with the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences and the College of Information and Computer Science, with his tenure home in the School of Public Policy. He is the former director of the Center for Civic Media at MIT and an associate professor of the practice at the MIT Media Lab. His research focuses on the use of media as a tool for social change, the role of technology in international development. He is the author of Rewire, Digital Cosmopolitans in the Age of Connection, and co-founded the international blogging community Global Voices. So welcome, Dr. Zuckerman. We're happy to have you speak with us today.
Thanks so much. I'm going to protest my promotion. I actually don't have a doctorate. I don't even have a master's. I'm someone who has kind of slid my way into academe in midlife after having a bunch of interesting careers in the technology industry. And I have great respect for the doctorate, and so I'm not going to claim it. But I actually am going to tell you about two of my doctoral students, and I'm going to tell you a story about their work as a way of talking about some of the issues that come up in the work that I do, which tends to be in the field of technology and social change. So if I could get that first slide, please, that would be great. Terrific, thank you. So I want to introduce you to my friend Catherine D'Ignazio. Catherine is now a professor at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. But in 2014, she was a master's student in my lab. She was pregnant with her daughter Maggie Jo during the first year of the program, gave birth over the summer, and was nursing her daughter and found that the MIT Media Lab, which is this pretty massive laboratory. It's about 800 people. It's a giant gleaming glass building in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It has tour groups going through it all the time. And it really had not been organized for nursing mothers. It didn't have nursing pods. Catherine was either using my office to pump or was pumping breast milk in the ladies' room, and people would leave little passive aggressive notes on breast pump parts, essentially saying too much information. We don't want to see that you're doing this. I actually had a male professor come to me and say, how did you allow your student to become pregnant? To which I said, I want to make clear that I had absolutely nothing to do with this. But this was not exactly a positive experience to be a nursing mother. If I get the next slide, please. Catherine started working with this other remarkable grad student of mine, Alexis Hope, who's finishing up her PhD this year. And they started asking this question: was there some way to take this sort of very technocentric, very young male dominated space of the Media Lab and see if some of the working methods there could be applied to a different set of issues, in this case, issues around being a nursing mother and working in this space. And they decided to take on this idea of the hackathon. Now, hackathons are a pretty common thing within technical universities. You get a bunch of people together, often they're young men, you get a whole bunch of pizza, and people stay up all night and they write software, and poof, innovation happens. And Catherine and Alexis started asking this question: what does innovation really mean? What do we innovate around? What questions are worth innovating for? And what they came up with was a strategy to hack the hackathon and invite a very different group of people than we usually invite to participate in these things, specifically nursing mothers and their babies, with the focus being improving the breast pump. So if I can get the next slide, please. So they started a hackathon, nope, one back, please, called Make the Breast Pump Not Suck. The Make the Breast Pump Not Suck hackathon started by surveying hundreds of nursing mothers online, inviting their reflections on what had been difficult about breastfeeding, particularly what they had liked and disliked about using a breast pump. Boy, there's a lot of feelings on that topic. Those reflections, they bound them together into a book, sent it out to everyone. They also put them on the walls of a room where an organizing committee got together and discussed what would happen. That room stayed up during the hackathon session, so everyone could come into that room and get a sense for what are the issues that people really wanted to solve. Next slide, please. So this hackathon looked really different from what you normally expect from a hackathon. The main participants were nursing mothers, their babies, their spouses or partners. There were lactation consultants, there were doulas, there were engineers there. Wonderfully enough, the people from Medela donated a number of pumps. People were hacking with those. And so we had scenes like this one in the slide sort of over and over again. Next slide, please. Ultimately, there were 150 people, parents, engineers, designers, healthcare professionals, who were reimagining the breast pump. And they came up with several new designs, innovative designs to change how breast pumps work. Next slide, please. Some of these ideas included 3D printed flanges so that you could actually have a flange that fit your breast better. A lot of designs around wearable pumps, pumps that were designed to be worn throughout the day. There were some really creative new prototypes. In fact, one of the ones that has gone to market, rather than functioning on suction around the nipple, focuses on pressure around the breast, mimicking hand expression, rather than putting stress on the nipple, which many mothers find uncomfortable. So what was amazing about this was 5 different products got to the point where they could come to market within a few months after this hackathon. But there was an interesting downside of this. Of those 5 different products, none of them was priced under $500. And that put them out of reach of the women who most needed them. Because while nursing is an issue for every socioeconomic class, the US does not have protected parental leave. And particularly women who are working low-income jobs often find themselves going directly back to work as soon as they are able, and they're often not able to pump while they're doing those jobs. And so despite really good intentions, what my students ended up finding was that they were working for the wrong audience. So next slide, please. The key mistake that they had made, they worked really hard to take hackathons and diversify them beyond geeky young men. But what they'd done in the process was recreated a hackathon in their own image. And basically what they did was constructed an event for well-educated, well-off white women who worked in technology. And better breast pumps are important for everybody, but as I mentioned, they're really important for mothers who don't have that opportunity to take parental leave. So if we head to the next slide, what I'm so sort of proud of from these young women is that they responded to their self-critique, this sort of realization that they'd hit the wrong audience, by going to the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, raising money to sponsor 18 months of research in which they went into the field and started partnering with existing birthing support groups in Tupelo, Mississippi, Detroit, Michigan, Boston, Massachusetts, and with a Diné community near Albuquerque, New Mexico. And they also realized that while they wanted to do a new version of this event and sort of take on this logic of the hackathon, right? The hackathon that they did at the Media Lab got enormous amounts of media attention. Lots of people wanted to come pay attention to it. They realized that they wanted to do a sequel very differently. So next slide, please. The first thing they needed to do was change the leadership team of the project. So it now includes a leading Black breastfeeding expert, Jen Roberts, who is one of the leading exponents of a field called equity by design. The white women who were participating in this found themselves challenged by the women who had just joined the team to go and take classes on anti-racism training. And they did. All the women involved ended up doing a training in anti-racism to try to think about equity and balance of power in running this organization. So long process, 18 months of research, a year's worth of planning before carrying out this second incarnation of the hackathon, now about a year and a half ago. Next slide. So the first thing is that this new hackathon had two components to it. It had people working on making new breast pumps and new technologies, but before that, there was a full day event, which was a policy hackathon. It was a day-long workshop on advocating for access to maternal leave for all Americans. And it was recognizing that America is sort of uniquely bad amongst advanced nations in giving maternal leave, and recognizing that the breast pump in some ways is a symptom. Breast pumps would be a much less serious problem if Americans could spend the first months of parenthood with their newborns. And so there was a training from people who were advocates around this, brainstorming new policy approaches. Next slide, please. The teams that were involved with the hackathon this time round were much less technically inclined. So we didn't get these sort of 5 new $500 breast pumps emerging. What happened instead were some amazingly practical projects, many of which have gone on to be produced. The team from the Diné community near Albuquerque actually redesigned traditional ceremonial wear so that it's compatible with nursing. One team designed a kit for pumping in a bathroom stall that keeps the pump, the bottles, the flanges, all of the different tools off the floor for sanitary reasons. I ended up joining a team called Earth, that's IRTH, Birth Without the Bias. It's building an intersectional Yelp for birthing services. So for instance, you might be recommended a place for birthing services, but you might want to ask the question, has this place been reviewed by Black women? Has it been reviewed by lesbian women? Has it been reviewed by someone who is closer to my own pattern of experiences? And is it likely to be a place that is safe for me? Now, I'll say something sort of funny about this. This version of the hackathon got almost no media coverage. It didn't get the headlines and the podcast that the first one did because it was coming up with all of these new sexy technologies. But everybody involved with it walked away from it feeling like this was a much better way to do this and a much better way of organizing this. They felt much better about who had participated in it, even if it didn't have the profile and the visibility that the first one had. So if I can get my next slide. Why am I telling you this story? So I have a couple of takeaways from this. And one of them is that I think there is real value in subverting existing institutions and ideas. part of what the hackathons, both of them, did really well was take this idea of technologists coming together and creating alternate futures, and they subverted those expectations. But I also think that when you're being innovative or subversive, there's this really strong tendency to pat yourself on the back. And there's an equally strong chance that you're reinforcing your own design biases and designing for yourself rather than designing for the people you're really trying to help. One of my big takeaways from this is that it's not impossible to design something new and worthwhile without involving the people who you're hoping to help, but it's really hard. And you're vastly more likely to get it right if the community, who is your audience, is involved early and often. And if I can just get the final slide, here are questions that keep recurring for me in my work. Who gets to be at the table? Who gets the right to innovate? What's a technical problem? Because it turns out most things that we think are technical are really socio-technical. They're a mix of human factors and communities as well as technologies. And if you don't take the human part of it seriously, you're going to miss out tremendously. And then the last thing that I would just close with is that design can be a tool for change. It can be very specifically a tool for equity, for inclusion, and for justice. And in the work that I do, in the work that my students are going off and doing in the world, this is pretty central to how we see our work. And I think it's something that all of us, no matter what we're studying, can sort of think about as an aspect of our work. So thank you for letting me share this story. I hope it resonates in some ways. And let me just say in closing, I am celebrating the work of two of my most brilliant students, and I'm doing it because I'm very proud of it, but I also just want to make it very, very clear this is their work, not mine. This is really me learning from them, which I think is one of the greatest things that can happen to you as an academic. So thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Zuckerman. Then sorry about the upgrade.
No worries. Professor's the favorite title I could possibly have.
Okay. So we'll just give Emily and our interpreters a moment to reset and get our next presenter on screen. Okay, here we go. And Dr. Fields, you will have control of Emily's slides if you would rather do the clicking.
I will if it works. We'll see.
We'll try. There we go. Okay. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Sheldon Fields, who is the Associate Dean for Equity Inclusion at the Pennsylvania State University. He is the founder and CEO of the SDF Group, which is a health innovation consulting company, as well as an educator, researcher, clinician, administrator, consultant, health policy specialist, and entrepreneur and business owner. He is a well-known and respected HIV/AIDS prevention research scientist with a significant focus on young men of color. He is also a lifetime member of the National Black Nurses Association and currently serves as the organization's first vice president. He chairs the NBNA Health Policy Research and Scholarship and Awards Committees and is the founding president of the Greater New York City chapter of the NBNA. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Fields, and we are excited to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you for the organizers for the kind invitation to join you today. I am Sheldon Fields, pronouns he, him, his. And I really, I'm listening today, my presentation that I'm going to talk about is pandemic nursing and lessons that were learned from the HIV/AIDS pandemic that are applicable to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in terms of some research opportunities. I can't seem to advance this. So, Emily, if you could advance it, it'd be fine with me. So just a few education objectives. I'm going to talk about some historical things related to HIV, AIDS, and COVID-19. Talk a little bit about treatment, vaccines, development, and 6 lessons learned. I'll finish with a discussion of implications for nursing advocacy and research. Next. I am a paid consultant for Gilead Sciences, which is my only disclosure. Next. Okay, so historically, as you can see on this slide here, pandemics have been with us for a while. They are not an unknown or an unfamiliar phenomenon. Indeed, we have been here before and have dealt with and managed them all. I want to draw your attention, however, on this slide to the year of 1981, when we first encountered the HIV/AIDS pandemic. We are now 39 years into dealing with the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And in that time, we have transformed this disease from being highly deadly, highly infectious, to one that people are managing and living with and actively living with HIV. Next slide. However, when the first case of COVID-19 was diagnosed in the United States on January 20th, many of us familiar with and working in the HIV/AIDS space had a deja vu moment for sure. A highly infectious disease that was proving to be deadly, that we did not have a good test for, and that we had no cure for, was eerily reminiscent of the early days of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. It was testing and the ability to detect the HIV virus that allowed us to get a handle on the spread of it. So as you will note on a slide, it took about 4 years after the first case for us to develop an HIV test. 30 years of testing has become more accurate as well as more sophisticated. You can now even do an HIV test on your own at home. In contrast, we have had a test to detect COVID-19 much earlier in its course, although there are some issues with the test that exist in various tests, and tests are not proving to be all the same. Today, people are currently living with HIV, some 1 million or so in the US, and the development of highly active antiretroviral medications have made living with the disease very manageable. Heart or highly active antiretroviral therapy can suppress the virus to being undetectable levels, making it possible or impossible, to not pass the virus. PrEP or pre-exposure prophylaxis also exists in order to prevent the initial infection. However, some 39 years later, we still do not have a cure for HIV. Similarly with COVID-19, which is still spreading with over 8.5 million cases and over 225,000 plus deaths in the United States. We do know how to decrease the spread of COVID-19 by wearing masks, washing your hands, and practicing social distancing. In contrast, worldwide, since the beginning of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, over 75 million people have acquired HIV and over 33 million have died. Point being is We've had more deadly, more fast spreading pandemics, but definitely there are some lessons that are applicable from how we have managed the HIV/AIDS pandemic that are not being fully utilized and recognized in how we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. So I have built a 20-year career in a highly active program of research in HIV/AIDS prevention with a focus on MSM of color. You see here on the screen a brief summary of my work, starting with my dissertation work to my postdoctoral work and my first major grant as a principal investigator, which was the HRSA SPINS Project Year Youth Empowerment around HIV work, to my work with the HIV Prevention Trials Network at the bottom of this slide, doing team-based science and international multi-site clinical trial work. I am well known in the field for my cultural, community-based expertise. And there are a few lessons that I have learned over my career in the past 20 years of dealing with the HIV/AIDS pandemic in terms of research that I think are quite applicable to the current COVID-19 pandemic that I'm going to share with you all here today. Next slide. So lesson 1 deals with the lesson of disproportionate impact on BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. Like HIV/AIDS, COVID-19 has proven more deadly for people of color in comparison to white populations. On the slides, you will clearly see that the rates of HIV diagnosis even today is disproportionately high in Black and other communities of color compared to the white population. In terms of COVID-19, we got early indications in the COVID-19 pandemic that Black and other people of color communities were being disproportionately impacted. And you see here on the slide, even when it comes to just the number of cases among even Indigenous and Native individuals is almost 3 times higher compared to their white counterparts. Mm-hmm. Same being for Black and African American populations as well. As equally higher is the number of hospitalizations and the number of deaths. I read a startling statistic that of the 200 plus nurses or so that have died from COVID-19, that 60% of those nurses are Black or other people of color, 60%. This disproportionate impact, similar to both pandemics, has been tied to the social determinants of health as significant drivers. Those factors that come into play that increase one's vulnerability and susceptibility. It is those factors where people live, work, play, and die. And we're having a synergistic impact as well. There is this interesting impact of these pandemics with issues of poverty and with racism. Next slide. Lesson number 2 is one of civil disobedience in nursing advocacy. HIV, when it first appeared, had a slow government response that led to protests early on and an outcry for funding to address the HIV/AIDS pandemic, especially during the Reagan administration. ACT UP became the voice in which people called upon the government to react and respond. Contrast to COVID-19, and there has been a similar protest and a call for appropriate resources, such as PPE, alongside of the Black Lives Matter protests in the wake of our country's reckoning with its racist past, personified by a rash of killings of Black and other people of color at the hands of police. This just did not start with the likes of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, Daniel Prude, and Ahmaud Arbery. The lessons to be learned here, as even nurses and other healthcare professionals protested for and brought attention to their working conditions, is a lesson that is shared amongst the two pandemics. But again, here we have a syndemic effect with an overlay of our current social milieu, the rise in the attention on racism and structural racism, and the realization that we are one people with many struggles. Next slide. Lesson 3 is related to research in diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. My personal mission, which you have here on this slide, with my work in HIV, is to increase access to HIV prevention and treatment for historically underserved and highly at-risk minority communities. This is the mission that drives my research and my current focus in collaborating and finding ways to ensure the inclusion of highly at-risk minority communities in the biomedical and other plans to end the epidemic. Similarly, issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion are shared by both pandemics. Early on in the HIV/AIDS epidemic with research, there was a lack of participation in research by Black and other communities of color that felt marginalized by traditional medicine. The same is happening in the research that's happening with COVID-19. There's not enough Black and other people of color who are enrolling in the clinical trials to develop a vaccine. Community engagement, lessons learned from how to engage these communities from the HIV/AIDS pandemic can surely be played or shared with those dealing with the COVID-19 research. Next slide. Lesson 4, and a very important lesson, is a lesson in sex. So we all know that the HIV/AIDS pandemic is sexually transmitted. And we have come up with inventive ways for people to continue to still have fulfilling sex lives and not transmit the virus. Many, many things have been said about issues related to sex and the spread of HIV. Anything from safer sex practices, self-pleasure, self-selecting partners, using of condoms, even in a time of COVID-19 and isolation. Some of the most important lessons, as my slide says here, are those recommendations on safer sex. A focus on one's personal risk reduction, accountability, testing and knowing your status and your potential partner status. And this whole issue of contact tracing and notification, which is the purview of public health nursing. Next slide. Lesson number 5, related to therapeutic and vaccine development in medicines. Medical mistrust within people of color communities, as I alluded to, has decreased the enrollment in medication and vaccine clinical trials. This was the same in the HIV/AIDS pandemic when populations mistrusted the government, and the speed at which therapeutics were developed. AZT, which was the first medication used in the treatment of HIV, was the fastest medication that received FDA approval at the time because we had no effective treatments. And As you can see, in terms of medication and treatments, remdesivir is an HIV medication that is being used to treat current COVID-19 patients. So is things such as dexamethasone and convalescent plasma, all of which President Trump actually received during his bout with COVID-19. What we've learned from the HIV/AIDS pandemic in terms of ramping up is the speed at which it must be done. So the current movement on the development of a vaccine has been undertaken by something called Operation Warp Speed, in that things are moving a lot quicker with the development of therapeutics and with a vaccine on the COVID-19 side, spawned on by lessons learned from the HIV/AIDS pandemic and the need to move quickly, because there was a lot of work put into the HIV/AIDS pandemic, and even things with an HIV potential vaccine through the HIV Vaccine Trial Network, which is a funded network through the National Institute of Health, and things such as the AMP study and the Mosaic study that is looking at monoclonal antibodies have really led to huge advances in the vaccine development field. Next slide. Lesson 6 is a lesson in pandemic nursing care. Nursing has always been on the front lines. Nursing is on the front lines. Nursing will remain on the front lines. Those of us who are nurses early on in the HIV/AIDS pandemic literally put our lives on the line. The same with COVID-19. Nurses have always been essential workers and always at the bedside. When it came to HIV/AIDS, we needed support. Hence, the Association of Nurses in AIDS Care came to fruition. It's a specialty group that is still in existence today that supports those nurses working in and with folks in the HIV/AIDS sphere. They have developed their own journal, the Journal of the Association of Nurses in AIDS Care, which is world renowned. They developed nursing guidelines and a certification process for one's expertise in the field through the HIV/AIDS Credentialing Board. Such is the case with COVID-19 and nurses being essential workers, and the nursing care guidelines that have been developed. Resources for nurses are available, and again, share an eerie resemblance to how do you deal with a pandemic that is so stigmatizing and that nobody wants to deal with. Next slide. So where are some opportunities as I complete my thoughts here today? So as nurses, we are key opinion leaders and a member of the most trusted profession. Nurses must use their power as nursing leaders. Nurses often do not use their collective energy. Advocating and supporting the Affordable Care Act, increasing access to research and demonstration projects is things that we need to be advocating for. A support for national research and talking with your patients to encourage their involvement in clinical trials and therapeutic and vaccine development. Advocating for nursing research through the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities and the National Institute for Nursing Research. We should be looking at nursing care standards, the impact on the nursing workforce, PPP usage, and disparities within the field are just some of the things within the nursing research wheelhouse. Next slide. Just some selected publications. Next slide. As well as references. Next slide. So here are my final thoughts. And here are some quotes. And I'll start with the first one by James Baldwin, which says, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all of the time." This statement rings as true today as it did when he stated it. James Baldwin, born in 1924. When you look at what the current social milieu is in our quest for equality, equity, and ultimately liberation, you gotta look at things that the two pandemics have in common. If we treat each other and see each other as as human beings and infuse a level of empathy and caring that is unique to the nursing profession, we can do a great deal and learn from one pandemic as we attempt to deal with the current pandemic. Last slide. I'm Dr. Fields, Dr. Darcy, the doctor nurse. I hide in public. You can always contact me, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Fields. That was very interesting, and we appreciate your insights between the two pandemics. Just gonna give everybody a chance to reset. And I'd like to remind all of our guests that if you have any questions for our speakers, we will have a moderated Q&A section coming up in a little bit. And you can put questions for the panelists and speakers into the Q&A chat on the Zoom, which usually has a couple of little quote boxes if you're looking to find that button. Oh, almost there. Okay, looks like we have the slides up. So I'm happy to introduce our last speaker, Ms. Sangeeta Agarwal. She is a software engineer from Silicon Valley, working for companies that include IBM, Motorola / Google, and is the developer of the world's first mobile video technology at a startup, which was later acquired by Skype. And this invention continues to change the world even today. Here we are, right? We're on Zoom. Ms. Agarwal is a researcher, oncology nurse, and integrative medicine practitioner at institutions including the Mayo Clinic, the Stanford Cancer Center, and UCSF Cancer Center. Ms. Agarwal founded HelpSee, the world's first artificial intelligence nurse for holistic symptom management and navigation, as well as she is also a nationally recognized speaker and author. So thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing your insights.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's truly an honor to be here and to hear the amazing speakers that have come before me. I hope that with what I shared today, you'll see I'm a student like you on this quest to learn, on this quest to PhD. I still don't have my PhD, I'm working on it, and trying to find ways that we can implement and bring to life the ideas, the thoughts, the policies, the vision of the leaders and of the people who have worked in this space. So with my presentation, I hope to share with you the way I've tried to take it and bring these points to life. I think as nurses, the core thing that that all our love stems from, and this resonated strongly with me, is to put patients first and to see how we can help them to be in their best condition. I see this more than just as patients, I think as fellow human beings, fellow living beings with one another. How do we live in a way that we can do it collaboratively and be in support of each other? So my own journey in this area was I didn't start as a nurse, but somehow my life and my path led me to become a nurse, and I still today consider myself nurse first. I came from very humble beginnings. I grew up in a very traditional family in the on the streets in India, where It didn't make sense to raise a girl, so I ate food from trash cans and studied by streetlight. Um, to become the first woman in my family to study and to work, again, all out of the desire of wanting to have a better life for myself. I wanted to be in healthcare. I learned traditional Indian medicine growing up, then went on to become a computer scientist, and did some work in this area. When I got a chance to take a pause, I started to look at my own health and the impact it had on my health, and realized that I want to find a way to have the best quality of life for myself. And as I went on this mission to find this for myself, by becoming a e-patient, by becoming a researcher and trying to look at the whole health approach to care, I found my own path and my own balance. I realized that that I want to devote the rest of my life to helping everyone else um, live the best quality of life that they could, live their life to fullest. And that's where my journey into healthcare, back into healthcare, began many years ago. Um, um, to, in the last 5 years. So I've gone back and studied Eastern and Western and technology, and as many of you here, trying to find ways that we can connect the dots between different areas, to build, to deeply understand what people need, and to bring solutions that will impact the community, because we live in a world where it's not divided by fields. Fields help us to learn, but the interconnection between those help us to build solutions that can be very powerful, and recognizing that. So since then, so I've done Eastern and Western medicine for 10-15 years. And then in the last 5 years, started HelpC, which became the solution for bringing this research into practice. HelpC has both for-profit and non-profit arm, because there was so much we were doing that we wanted to serve the community regardless of the business need. So what led me to, from a nurse to building the technology was truly the challenge that we saw with the patients, truly the hurt that I saw, because it made no sense to me as a cancer nurse, that 1 in 2 men or 1 in 3 women will get cancer in their lifetime. So there is a large number of people who are facing this, if you look at a population level. At the same time, about 90% of the people who go through these cancers are going to have complications. And about 40% are going to go bankrupt in the first few years of their life, which means so many families, millions of families across the country are going bankrupt because of this. All of this when we're spending so much on healthcare. And the most interesting realization for me as I started to dig into research and reading papers was that about half of these issues are actually preventable problems. And they were preventable if they had enough time and support from their nurses and from their social workers and from their nutritionists and psychotherapists. What an amazing opportunity to be able to make a difference, and what a loss to not be able to save somebody's life because of that. So I wanted to make sure that I'm always by my patient's side, no matter where they are, even if they are at home. Now, I can't stalk them at home, and I shouldn't. So I started to think about how do we give a piece of ourselves and be there with them all the time whenever they need us. And that's kind of where we started to collaborate and build, think of how we can make this knowledge accessible. As Dr. Kelly and Dr. Tiffany talked about cross collaboration and cross-disciplinary work. I would read a lot of research from various people and bug them. and over time, we established collaborations and ended up with this community, this village of researchers in quality of life, clinicians, lots of patient advocates who were passionate about various aspects, whether it was about inclusivity, whether it was about finances, whether it was about diversity. We had designers, we had technologists, all kinds of people, and we were all trying to figure out how do we share our knowledge with the community, how do we build something that will solve the problem that we were seeing. And as a tool builder, we were able to collaborate, and I was able to build tools or facilitate some of these conversations. And our work started. This is way before we even knew that we were going to be building something. We just wanted to save one person, to be able to prevent one small problem from happening if we could. Here, I think an important lesson, as Dr. Kelly said, is to, and Dr. Tiffany also mentioned, it's about seeing the unique talents, the value of the people around you, and how we can collaborate with one another towards the intention we are working on. Many times we may not have all the answers. We may not even know the full path to get there. But if we know that someone else cares about the same problem and they are open and willing to muddle on this with us, that risk is worth taking. We never know where we may end up, and we may end up building something that could make a difference. And that's where our journey began. And many of us still continue to collaborate with each other. And the community has only grown to more than 60 to 100 people collaborating on this on a monthly basis from all walks of life. So next, I want to talk about research collaboration. What I'm going through in my presentation is I want to show you different aspects and how collaborations happen, with the goal, with the hope that I'll inspire you to think about how you can take something that you're passionate about, plant that seed, cultivate those relationships, and think about how you could start humble beginnings to making a difference, because you never know where that seed will grow, where that idea can bear fruit, and what an impact you can make in the world. So I'm going to walk through many different aspects of the industries and how my journey has been, and not just my journey. In fact, it's the journey of everybody who's been involved at HelpSee, which is over 250 people now who have been contributing in many different ways. So it's part of our journey. So talking about research, as we know, like there was some research going on when it came to technology about 5, 6, 10 years ago, but not a lot related to health technology. So when I was thinking of doing research in this area, and I wanted to bring whole health approach to care to the community, I ended up with writing research grants and getting NIH funding for that whole health approach to care, never for technology. That was not the intention. But as we saw challenges where, coming all the way, so I was at UCSF, which is in San Francisco, downtown. And we were doing this Ayurveda study where we would help with managing symptoms by providing whole health approach. So by providing diet and lifestyle and yoga and meditation, along with, helping them with symptom management in an evidence-based way. It was first study of its kind because we were already challenging the system in more than one way, because we had talked about how the limitation of impact of traditional medicine is not because of the medicine itself, or not because of the modality itself, but it's because of the research method. So we were working on a new research method, or a more novel research method, in being able to write out a whole manual where we wrote down a multimodal approach, a unique approach to care, where it could be customized for each person, but it was through standard measures. So we were already at cutting edge for that. And then what started to happen was that because it was so far away, it was difficult for people to come there. So people would not be able to attend. They would come for a session, but they had to pay, you know, $20-$30 for gas, and then $20 to $40 for parking for an hour. It didn't make sense for them. So we started having a lot of dropouts. So during this time, we started to figure out how do we make it easy for people to be able to stay in the study? How do we make it easy for them to fill out their journal, because we were asking them for paper journals. And I would see that uh, before the appointment, they were sitting in the front office filling out the journal for the whole month. So how do we make it easy for them? So that's kind of where we started to brainstorm and come up with ideas and come up with solutions. We started using the technology that we had built, I had built before, with video on the phone, and making that HIPAA compliant. We started with developing digital journals and other solutions, and that kind of became the go-to thing, that all the researchers would come and we would collaborate on how do we develop technologies that would make it easy for people to be in the study and to be a part of the study. So even in your own life, even in the way you are thinking about research, in the way you are thinking of bringing solutions, think about the problem at hand and think about how you solve that problem and how you advocate for that, how you collaborate to build those solutions. Now, what we are doing from a research perspective is really looking at real world evidence. Because when we do research, we design the study to be what it is. But what happens in the real world? It's messy. There are so many factors. There are so many unplanned events that happen. But that gives us real insight into what's going on with people's lives. And what if we could study that at a large population scale? What if research was already built the into the fabric of solutions we use? So that's kind of where the work we do now in research stems from, is that real world evidence and really focusing on quality of life, because I think those aspects of understanding how you're feeling, your anxiety, your depression, your sleep, what worries you, are you thinking about how you're going to pay your bills, how you're going to talk about your cancer with your child, how you're going to talk about that with your employer. Are you thinking about how your partner is going to react to your sexual health related to cancer? Those are things that we are scratching the surface of. But if we can understand what people need, then we can truly build solutions and provide support that can make a difference. And that's what we do. We are able to do. We are now doing passive research on what people use, what goes on in their mind, what they're thinking when they're using the solution. And that helps us to understand this at a much larger, diverse level. And many key insights that have come from this have challenged the perception today, and given us food for thought on what the communities need, especially the low income, the vulnerable, the social determinant of health community. Me being a core part of that growing up, I can relate to that. So those are some ideas around research. So find what you're passionate about and build. Don't be afraid to start wherever you can. Now let's look at it from an employer from us as humans. Many of us are working. When we are working and we are diagnosed with a health issue that impacts us, I'm going to be speaking a lot from complex condition space, because that's my area of expertise. So when I worked with cancer patients, as an employee, you're really worried because a lot of times you don't have the support to go through that cancer, to have the guidance and support on what to do. You may not have disability for a very long time, or you may not have disability at all. So how are you supposed to manage with all of that? And you may lose your job, or you may struggle to come back to work. There is all kinds of stigma, there is fear around it. So how do we address that? So that's where we, as we listen to people, we started to collaborate with employers and build solutions where we can provide a navigation, AI navigation, and actual nurse navigator as part of the solution, to people who are going through complex conditions, who are going through diseases like cancer. So they have that support throughout. They don't feel alone, and they can ask the questions they need. Their problems, some problems can be prevented for them. And for employers, it is very valuable because they are able to retain their employee, they're able to provide support to their employees, they are able to save on healthcare cost, which is one of their biggest cost is in these complex conditions, and they're able to bring their employees back to work sooner. So by thinking about the win-win for everyone, we were able to build some amazing collaborations in this space and be one of the organizations that is in fact covered by many employers as part of pre-tax benefit. So kind of a benefit that you can select along with selecting dental and others. Similar for payers. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over it. Pharma, as we know that, when it comes to complex conditions, many of us, our patients, struggle with understanding what that medicine means, understanding how to manage the side effects. Not having support for managing those medications are very, very expensive. So many times they're not able to afford that. And then what happens when they have questions and complications and are not able to get the answer? So we thought about how might we help people as it relates to the pharma industry. So we had brainstorming sessions with them, design sessions with them, and we thought about solutions that can impact the community. We did hackathons with pharma companies, and came up with ideas and solutions that can make a difference in the lives of patients, by providing them entire symptom management, by providing them proactive education, by providing them with information on with the community resources that are there, by connecting them with the representatives at pharma or their programs related to saving money, by recognizing these issues proactively and addressing it for those individuals with no stigma, with access to things at the click of a button, either for the patient or for the family. And by doing that, we were able to establish, relationships with pharma companies, so that they could help patients, and by helping patients, they could help themselves. So finding that win-win continues to be a core part of how we approach the world. As many of our speakers that I so highly admire have talked about, we all don't have equal access to care. If you don't have food and money to buy food, we can't talk about nutrition, and we can't talk about healthy nutrition. We can't talk about adherence when you don't have money to buy medication. We cannot talk about getting to your appointments and making every appointment if you don't have resources to be able to get there. So being able to provide resources and knowledge and empower everyone, regardless of their financial situation, regardless of their color, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of the region, regardless of sexual preferences, so many factors, education, age. How can we do that? Can we bring that democracy to healthcare? Can we make it easy for people to be empowered, to give them the knowledge, to give them the resources, give them the access to things? And that's where we realize that there are so many amazing resources that are there in the world. There are so many amazing people, as you all have met, who have built this phenomenal repository of knowledge. There are so many nonprofits that are bringing these programs out there into the community. So could we be the collaborators? Could we be the umbrella that connects people, that make it easy for people, like the way you click a button and you get an Uber car, or you click a button and you get your groceries, or you buy a book on Amazon? Can we do that? And that's what we started to do with the Help See nonprofit, because now we want to be able to provide this to the community. So by doing that, we've been able to serve over 25,000 people. Our nonprofit status went live as of the second quarter, or June, July of this year. And we are already in the process of collaborating with 36 nonprofits, collaborating with various academic universities for the knowledge, collaborating with various healthcare centers in terms of distributing access and solutions. So you never know, where your idea and the collaborations with the right people will take you. That's what we've been doing with the nonprofit. Last point, just to quickly share with you, um, um, all this wouldn't be possible if we don't help ourselves. And I think as nurses, that is really, really, really important. We hold such amazing, vast knowledge. I looked at every profession, and I tried to think of what resonates the most with me. And to me, it was nursing, because we work with people from birth to death. We work with people across the entire spectrum of their physical, emotional, social, financial, family, environment, all aspects of their life. And we work in every industry. So if we can empower ourselves and we can empower those who we collaborate with, then we can do so much more. And that's what we have tried to do as well. By building, by raising nurses to become nurse informaticists, to become the leaders in this space, giving them those tools, giving them those decision-making power and that analytics data, by giving them technologies that give them ability to connect with anyone in the world, to be able to have the freedom, to have freelancing abilities, to be able to do research easily. So in your own way, try to figure out how you can be a torch, how you can be a light, how you can support your community, so that together we can do a lot more. In closing, as I said, we are natural collaborators. We, as nurses, we roll up our sleeves and get things done. We don't take no for an answer. We just say, okay, now how am I going to solve this, right? So I think keep that spirit no matter where you go. Collaborate with others who share your interest, who share your expertise, who share the passion with you. If there isn't someone like you in the space, if there isn't that space, if there isn't that solution yet, it's fine. You go in and make that space. You'll, regardless, you're going to learn, and if you're successful, you'll be able to change the way things were done. Everything we have today is because of somebody else's effort in bringing us to where we are, whether we are all the way at the end of the journey or we start the journey and somebody carries forward. That path is really, really important. And in all of this, remember to celebrate your little victories along the way, and to know that failure is going to be a part of life. Being put down is going to be a part of life. But as nurses, we know that, we are used to that. Take that to heart. Find your self-care, find your grounding, and go and change the world, because each and every one of you have the ability, have the power, have the knowledge, and are a nurse, so you can go change it. I know that, and I have full confidence in you. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much for speaking. That was a very amazing talk from somebody who loves tech and all of the areas that you worked in. So what we're going to do now is reset for our panelist discussion. So we'll just take a moment to get that all squared away. If you have any other questions, please feel free to continue putting them in the Q&A. And we're going to get our speakers back up on screen and our interpreter as well. All right, looks like we're going good. I think if somebody can give me a heads up if they can see everybody on the screen. Yes, okay, good.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so thank you all again for giving your talks. That you all provided interesting perspectives on collaboration, as well as different looks at into how technology and interdisciplinary collaboration can be used. Oh, it looks like, sorry, Do we have Tiffany and Gabrielle up on the screen as well for the moderated panel?
You do.
Okay. All right, good. So yeah, so you all provided very interesting takes on collaboration. I just wanted to ask, has anybody received resistance from our non-nursing collaborators when trying to reach out to other fields? And if you have, how have you resolved this?
Well, I have a good example of this. I shared in the talk that I own a psychotherapy practice, and one of the areas that are important is that when we're meeting with individuals, that we truly do a holistic assessment. And so I had a client, and I've had many whom I've sent off to get lab work done, because before you can diagnose someone with depression or bipolar disorder, you should rule out vitamin D deficiency, B12 deficiency. And so I sent the lab order, and the physician called me himself to say, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Because I want to treat this client holistically, and I want to make sure that I don't put someone on an antidepressant who really should be on a vitamin D supplement, or who really should be on thyroid medication." And, since that conversation, he's referred multiple clients to the practice. I think that at first the resistance was met because as a psychiatric mental health professional, he hadn't really had a lot of us sending and copying our lab orders. But this is truly one of the ways in which I think our practice stands as unique, because we do collaborate a lot with other practitioners and value that collaboration. And so I think since then, he's looked at it very differently. So that's one of my examples.
Thank you. Sangeeta?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I can go on. Okay. So given that I dabble in, in so many industries, I think there are so many stories of resistance, but also finding a path forward. So I'll just share a few with you. So as an innovator, as an entrepreneur, it's important to raise funds to be able to support your ideas. That's typically how you think about it. But as a nurse, some of the things I heard was, no, but nurses work for the doctors. So we had a panel of doctors, I think probably 4 or 6 eminent industry specialists on our board, and said, no, make the doctor as the CEO, and then we will have a conversation with you. Otherwise, no. We talked about hackathons, as Dr. Auckland talked about hackathons and incubators. We would get to the final round, third round of selection at some of these prominent hackathons or incubators or the investment round, but the team of experts there in the healthcare space was only medical doctors and researchers. They never had a nurse, they never had a nutritionist, psychotherapist. So nobody understood why it was so important to have a solution that addressed these aspects of life. And we would always get eliminated at that last round because it was about either not addressing a core medical need, or it was about not having a medical doctor as the leader. And of course, as women, already in this industry, we are at a disadvantage, as we know, as you may not know this, but 98% of funding goes to male-owned startups. Less than 2% goes to women. And in that 2%, there is such a small fraction that goes to minority women that it's difficult to count. So I was at a disadvantage from all angles. The question was, do I stop and not do something, or do I just do it? So I just started building, after 12-hour shifts, doing it on my own, started researching, started asking people if you want to collaborate, whether we didn't know whether it would be for profit or non-profit, but we started just building things and started working on it. And we are 5 years down, and we are just still building it. And we have donations from organizations and people contributing their time to make what needs to happen. So, and now as more women are going into the space, as social determinants of health, behavioral health is becoming a factor that people understand, They're like, oh, actually you work in that space. That's a novel idea. I'm like, actually, you may not remember me. I came to you 5 years ago asking you to think about this. So that's pretty common. That happens in the in the research space. As some of you may experience this, I did not get my PhD yet. But because of that, a lot of times I would do innovation, I would collaborate for innovation, I would do talks, I would start innovation programs and professional groups, but I would not be allowed to be the chair of that group, or I would not be invited to be the speaker of that. So I would send proposals, and then someone within the group would be invited to lead it because they were the PhDs, or they were a doctor. And that still happens today. I'm part of many groups. I've founded many innovation groups among some of the most prominent organizations, including ONS. But I don't have that title, and that's fine. It's about recognizing what you can do, what you cannot do, but staying true to the passion, and doing what you can, because at the end of the day, one day we'll be in the ground. So those titles are temporary. If we can do something about it, that's great. If we can't, it's fine if you care about the passion.
All right, Tiffany, I think you had something to say, and then Sheldon, I think, okay.
Yes, so I shared some successes today of collaborations from relationships I've been able to develop. But there have been many times when I've been met with resistance. I think that's the nature of what it means to be an innovator, because if you're really trying to push boundaries that haven't been ventured before, and so you're challenging what people's assumptions are in the process of doing so. And to be more specific, I shared that I went off to start a business, and I was so excited. I couldn't wait. And I knew nothing about starting a business, but I knew I could do it, right? So I went off and I went through the process of creating the product and developing pitch decks and competing in these competitions. And what started to happen was the judges were often not nurses. In fact, most of the competitions I had participated in were not focused necessarily specifically in healthcare. There were no nurse featured competitions at the time in which I was doing these pitches. And the question that came up time and time again, sometimes from nurses, but most of the time from others, was, I don't understand. I didn't realize nurses could start businesses. And so I would hit that time and time again, or some derivative of that. And the frustration would build inside, because I knew at that point, it didn't matter what else I said. I needed to now work on the barrier of changing this perception on why is it that a nurse can start a business. And in my mind, I'm like, well, why couldn't they? What's going on here? There's no prerequisite. And so what I did to address that was, after it happened a few times, and from my qualitative training, I recognized that when I started to hear things multiple times, it meant that was a theme. And so when I would hear things multiple times, I realized, okay, there's something going on here and I need to fix it. So how do I fix this? And so what I decided to do was, I felt that we needed to change the perception. And so even though I'm one person, I leveraged LinkedIn to start telling stories of other nurses that were innovating and as entrepreneurs, to help build awareness that, yes, this is possible. It's not just me, and change that perspective. And ultimately, that's a lot of the reason why I'm in the role I'm in at UConn, is to help make that pathway easier and more streamlined for individuals, so that hopefully other nurses in the future don't feel this and don't experience this. But I think resistance, I have, as Sangeeta said, I have many other examples of this, but it's inherent in innovating that you're going to hit resistance, whether it's from people within your discipline or not. You're challenging assumptions and trying to bring change. And by the nature of doing so, there's going to be, the majority are going to say, I don't get it, or I'm not interested. Just look at Rogers' diffusion of innovation. You're only going to find 2.5% of the population that's going to be super excited when you start. So when you encounter that, don't get frustrated, and don't see it as a sign to stop. Just see it as a sign of, okay, I'm at the beginning of this, and it's going to be a challenge, but I can do this. And that's sort of how I've sort of approached it now, as a what was the nursing care plan diagnosis? Knowledge deficit. A knowledge deficit to address.
Oh no, you're gonna give me flashbacks.
I know. I'm sorry. I felt I had to do it. We're at a nursing conference, and you got to look back to those care plans that you spend hours on. So that would be my thoughts on that.
All right, thank you. Sheldon, I believe you
Yes.
had something to add?
So I do very quickly, because my main resistance to the work that I do has come from nursing academia itself. I'm a little bit of a unicorn in the world of nursing anyway. How dare you be a Black Latino male with a doctorate in nursing who's a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing, all of 15 of us. So I often find myself in places and spaces where I'm an N of one. There's not a reflection of who I am. And as I pursued my nursing career and doing the type of research I was doing in HIV/AIDS, I kept being told and stared towards that very individualistic way in which science is done and valued within the academy, i.e., why are you not pursuing more individual R01 level research to elevate yourself, which is really what those types of grants do. And my work was more based in community and more based in the collaborations that I had with my colleagues within the HIV Prevention Trials Network and the HIV Vaccine Trials Network, where we do true team-based, innovative, international, multi-site trials. And as sometimes often the only nurse on those teams, I was bringing the nursing perspective, the lens that I had, not only also my cultural expertise, but in the world of nursing academia, the resistance always was, well, you're not going to get, tenured and promoted that way because it wasn't valued. And it's really unfortunate because I've been able to do more innovative work collaboratively within those networks than I could have ever done in the pursuit of an individual R01, which is not where I'm ever going to take my career at this point, 20 plus years in. I don't care if I ever get another R01. It's just not moving the science the way that I need to do it within the world that I work in. And contrast that now to what we're trying to do, even with COVID-19, if we have to work together, this individual focus and people not getting value for their work, particularly from their own, can be quite disheartening. So anyway.
Thank you so much for that insight. I'm going to turn it over to Janine for our next question.
It was fantastic. Thank you all. So can anyone speak, or I'm sure several of you have some insights into this, to some strategies that we can use to harness the inner strength that is necessary for the inevitable challenges that are encountered when innovating? Anyone want to start us off? Ethan.
I'll take a little crack at this. I think a lot of innovation comes from personal experience. In the story that I told, it really started with Catherine's frustrations at being mistreated as a nursing mother. For Alexis, she'd done a great deal of work on maternal health in Uganda in the past. So I think there's personal interest that sort of gets us started in many cases, but that tends not to be sustainable fuel. You can only get so far on your own frustration. And anger and frustration is a fuel that can burn very hot but very fast. Alexis's work right now is on the role of joy in activism and innovation. And for me, that's a much more sustainable long-term fuel. I tend to think of that sort of initial, frustration, anger, dissatisfaction as sort of the launch stage. But the cruise stage has to do with building communities of people that you love and love being around and you love creating things with. And that joy of being engaged in the act of creation, even when it's creation that is sort of focused on change and changing these long-term structural injustices. So I just think thinking about how we sort of balance what's fueling us as innovators. I've done, 5 or 6 different startups, mostly in the nonprofit field. And I've kind of learned that whatever it is that sort of got me going those first couple of months, that can wane. But the strength that I get from building diverse creative teams and from discovering what that team can come up with and can create, that's a fuel that can last for years. One of the projects that I continue to be enormously proud of is called Global Voices. It's a global news and blogging community that has contributors from about 180 countries. That's been going for 14 years. My role at this point is sort of a proud grandparent of it. But it's that joy that people get from watching each other express themselves that ends up sort of fueling it in the long term. So don't neglect joy. It's the most sustainable fuel you can find as an innovator or an activist.
I love that. Thank you, Ethan. Dr. Kelly.
I agree. I think your ideas stem from usually some sort of user pain that you feel and frustration, or watch and observe. And but I think in addition to that is, and in the context of the environment we're in today and the event we're at, you're problem solving. And even as PhD students, you're scientifically solving a problem, a small problem to start that can build over time. And for me, that's how I look at whatever it is that's bothering me. Whether it's small or large, like what is this problem I'm running up against? How many other people are affected by it? And am I somebody that could solve it for other people? And I think too often we think of innovation and entrepreneurship as very financially driven and business oriented, which it has that element to it, of course. However, what's not talked about as often, which I think is where this can be related to healthcare more often, is the impact potential, in the sense of, if I make this thing that X amount of millions of people need, and I'm able to create it in a way that it can be available for all, then I'm able to impact that many people rather than what I could do one by one. And that, for me, I think is where I try to get people to think about. And it helps motivate. It's a long journey. I think the other thing you need to take into consideration is setting your own realistic expectations for a timeline. There's a perception that innovation can happen in a short 3 to 6 month time frame within an accelerator program, that you could go from idea to revenue generation. And that may happen for some consumer products. So when we're talking about healthcare, that time frame becomes far longer. And so being able to adjust that, and I can only say that because I've lived through it, right? So I've lived through having to constantly readjust those time frames. I think joy, as Ethan said, is very important as well. Those would be my thoughts on being able to really sustain. And look at Simon Sinek and his description of your why. That's one of the first questions I'll ask people is why, what stemmed the interest in this for you? If there's a deep reason there, then usually people have more interest. If it's just, it looks like it's something that people need and I might be able to generate some income off of it, that's not usually as sustainable for the time it takes.
Thank you. Tiffany. That was great. I hate to have to cut the conversation off, but we are running long. So I am going to transfer our conversation to the, well, we'll continue the conversation in the panels or the small group discussions at the end of the symposium. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Olivia Fraser, who is our Director of Development and has some words of wisdom from our alumni.
Hi, it's been great listening to all of you today. Thanks for being here. I have been with the College of Nursing since 2013 and love working with nurses. I love hearing your stories of innovation. They're super inspiring, and I love the commitment that you consistently give to the practice of caring for communities and people across the world. I get the privilege of working with nurses who've had long careers, nurses who are just out in the field for the first time. And I often understand that the breadth and field of nursing is so wide and far. So I really want to just spend a few minutes to welcome everyone to come and talk to us, to stay in touch with us. The Nursing Alumni Network is invaluable to both students and alumni. It promotes relationships that are lifelong. We support students and support connecting them with where they want to be connected. We have alumni across the world, of course, but we have a high concentration in the Boston metropolitan area and the New York metropolitan area. The majority of UMass alumni in general are highly focused in the tri-state region. Although I will say that we do have people, like I said, all over the country and all over the world. If there's a particular place that you're interested in working and want to connect with, I encourage you to reach out to me or my colleague Benjamin Monat at the College of Nursing. Both of us can look into our database and look up a business or enterprise you're interested in and find out if we have any alumni in that area. There are also several ways for you to stay connected with the college. We have a very active alumni board that meets 6 times a year. We meet on typically the first Monday of every month from 5 to 6 p.m. And you can connect with all these meetings via Zoom. They're 1 hour in length right now. In case you do want another Zoom meeting, we won't make it too painful for you. But I very much encourage you to stay connected with us. Think about joining our alumni network and consider connecting with us individually as well if there's a place that you're interested in working or interested in making a connection. Everywhere from, Mass General to universities in California, it's really quite a wide breadth. Thank you so much, and I've really enjoyed being part of this. Back to you.
Thank you, Olivia. Starting to feel like a little bit like a news anchor. All right, so for closing remarks, we will have Dr. Walker return. And after that, we will have you all click on the Zoom link for the breakout sessions, which will be posted to the chat.
All right, thank you so much, Danielle. And thank you all. This has been just an amazing space and community to be a part of today, truly. As Danielle mentioned, the next event to close out this series of incredible sessions is the breakout discussions, which you were offered an opportunity to sign up for at the time of registration. If you do not remember which one you signed up for, or if somehow the link has gone missing, please do not panic. We have folks standing by to assist. And as Danielle mentioned, links to those session rooms will also be appearing in this chat. After we go to those rooms, that will truly finish out our day. We will not be coming back for any additional closing remarks. However, we have moderators in each of those rooms who will be taking notes about what is discussed, and we will endeavor to make that information accessible to you after today's event has ended. So please stay tuned for a post-event survey, which will also provide some links to materials you saw presented today and information on how to access any additional recordings or information from today's symposium. We've heard such wonderful, amazing stories. Anytime we get presenters like this in a room, I just continue to be struck by the power of story and personal experience, collective experience that drives research and innovation and entrepreneurship. Some of the themes that came through to me today as I was listening to all of you share your wisdom and your insights, these questions about, the inspiration for design and innovation. Where does it come from? Who is driving those conversations? Power. Who gets to decide what constitutes a design challenge we should be focusing on in the first place, or a research question we should be seeking to answer? Activism in the work of innovation, of research, of dissemination, and also importantly to the panel discussion we just heard, in community building, and this notion that none of us can do this work alone, and that all of us exist in a greater fabric that is the communities we work with and for. So I cannot thank our presenters enough for taking time today to be with us and to bring us some of those lessons. I cannot thank our staff and ASL interpreters enough for their labor and helping to make this event far more accessible than I think any event we've had in the past. I do want to encourage us all to stay in conversation, to please come back. And to those of you who are alumni among our attendees today and our students who are here with us now, thank you. Thank you for continuing to be in community with us. For those of you who may wish to be part of this community here at UMass Amherst in the future, we are here, we are listening. We would love to talk to you about that. And finally, I will plug a defense that will be happening tomorrow as one more of our nurse innovators and entrepreneurs, a nurse who founded her own foot care business. In the course of doing the dissertation research she will be presenting tomorrow, Kate Clayton-Jones will be doing that tomorrow evening, and we invite any of you who are part of this community to show up for that presentation as well. So thank you, and we hope you have the best week possible. And with that, I believe we will go to our breakout sessions for some smaller and more intimate discussions about these issues of nursing, innovation, and collaborations that transform the face of healthcare and our communities. Thank you so much.